All right, good evening, everyone. This is Dispersing the Fog. I'm Adam Rogers here with Paul Palango. This is episode 27 of Dispersing the Fog. Number 27. Who's that? Is that Vladimir Guerrero's
Frank
number?
Mahavlich.
Frank Mahavlich. I was going to say Shane Corson of all the people to remember. Okay, so I'm not even a Canadians fan. Uh, so, Paul, we've got a special treat here for everybody, which is we're bringing back Tom Juby for two in a row. We had a great long chat with Tom last week about Swiss Air and his role in it, and some of the controversies surrounding his reporting and all that stuff. We get into the technical details of it, and this week we're going to continue that discussion and get into why we don't already all know what he concluded. And
Isn't it's amazing? Like when you listen to Tom Juby last week, you're hearing a version of the story that's not the official narrative.
yeah,
And to my mind, and I think to yours, he's a credible guy. He says, like, I've gone over 13,000 pages of documents that he was involved in or the RCMP was involved in, stuff that's never been seen before. And it's all the facts. It's not opinion, it's not emotion. And I think you saw last week, he's a tough guy. I mean, he put together, he was doing fingerprints, putting the skin on his fingers and doing, like that's not what normal people do, but he gets through it. He has the mental strength and fortitude to do the job that has to be done. He's a good old-fashioned cop.
like detail oriented. He went through thousands of pieces of evidence, cataloging them, photographing them, and traveling on different planes that Swiss Air had, testing them out in different ways. It's not, he's the complete opposite of, just some wingnut on a computer spouting their opinion. He's been doing this all in the background, very detailed.
And there was nothing in it for him to come forward and say, at the time, back in 1998, 1999, and up to 2002 or so, there was nothing in it for him other than doing the right thing. That's my read on it.
Yeah.
And other forces were suppressing him. And we've seen that with the Nova Scotia massacres, with the Meher case, and countless other cases where the official narrative is not the truth.
Yeah. You're right,
And
though.
that's
There would have been nothing in it for him. And like the easiest thing in the world for him to do would have just been, oh, sure, all right, well, go along then, and off you go, right? And go on with his life. But he didn't do that. And so we'll get into some of his account of his experiences in trying to push back against a powerful set of systems, I think.
That's right. And that's the importance of this, the pushback. And he hasn't given up. He's telling his story. He's like Leon Jodrey in the Nova Scotia massacres. He's not changing his story. But the fact is, and I reiterate, the documents support his version of events.
Yeah, and like Dr. Jim Brown, who had the magnesium discovery and comments. I mean, this guy's a world-renowned expert as well. I mean, people are supportive of Tom's theories. It's not, yeah, it's not just some
All of
guy.
that has been suppressed. Let's bring him back.
Okay,
Let's
let's get
do it
Tom
again.
back in here. Yeah, let's find. Okay, here he is.
There we are.
There we are. Hi, Tom, back again. Thanks for joining.
Long time no see.
Thank you.
All right, so Tom, when we left off last week, we were talking about a lot of the technical sides of your report, the study that you did, the investigation, the cataloging of thousands of pieces of evidence, photographing. It's anyway, it was really interesting stuff. And we got to the conclusion of, well, it was an incendiary device, something on the plane, but why, who, and what happens next? All things we want to talk about today.
And before we go on, the other thing is Swiss Air happened on September 2nd, 1998. Prior to that, there were a couple of other mysterious crashes on this essentially the same route. TWA 880, 800, I guess, in Long Island Sound. All these planes take off from JFK. TWA 800, Egypt Air 990, a couple of years later, and then Swiss Air, all on the same route, taking off from the same airport. And after 9/11, another one crashed, American Airlines, I think 592, taking off from that airport. It was very I don't think there's ever been a case where four planes in a 4 or 5 year period taking off from the same airport all crash into the sea, which seemed unusual. Just on, the plausible explanations were given, but there were contrary evidence in every one of those cases, and I think that was suspicious too. So over to you. I'll leave that for you, and you can deal with it.
Now, of course, Swiss Air came down in '98. What what was particularly, or what is particularly important about the RCMP's handling of it? Within 3 days of the crash, all passenger profiling was canceled. Passenger profiling would be to know who Paul Palango is. Okay, fine, Paul Palango, we have your birth date, and we may even have fingerprints for you. But why were you on the plane? Where were you going? What's your job? What do you do? And what were your intentions when you got to where you're going? Geneva. Were you carrying on somewhere else? That stopped, that ceased. Day 3.
Why did that stop?
Highly unusual
Why?
because it was ordered out of Ottawa. Don't know why. I was told by one of the guys who was working passenger profiling, we were told to stop. Same goes for cargo. Now we have mentioned the jewels that were on board, the diamonds. TSB came to me and said, where's the material in the computer dealing with that shipment of diamonds? There isn't any. It was never investigated because it was cargo, and I'm assuming it was cargo. We don't know if it was carried by a courier or by actually as part of cargo. Don't know that. Why? So we've got no passenger profiling, so we don't know. I've rolled fingerprints of military guys, ex-military guys, retired. They were easy because they were good fingerprints coming out from the FBI. Every federal government employee in the States is fingerprinted, and they're on file forever and a day. I got them, and oh boy, here we go. Here's so and so, and here's so and so, and here. What are these guys? Are ex-Army, ex-Air Force, ex-Marine? What are they doing on board? Don't know. Don't know. Just forget about it. Yeah, okay. So I went on to the next one, and that was in the first within the first week. Then we get over to the aircraft hangar, and I do my first trip to Ottawa for the AES, the Auger electron spectroscopy, and I come back. I sent a message back by email, a memo that, hey guys, these are the results. This is the possibility of what's on that plane, and we have to be prepared that there may have been a criminal device on that plane, and have to deal with it. When I got back, keep quiet about it. It's secret. Shut up. Don't talk about it. Over the next 2 years, I went through a series of meetings, closed door meetings with my immediate staff sergeant, and then with my staff sergeant and my inspector. And the inspector didn't have two clues about conducting an investigation of any type, let alone a fire investigation. And what are you doing conducting a criminal investigation? Why are you what do I have to do to get through to you? There is no criminal investigation here. You will not conduct a criminal investigation.
Well, isn't the issue there, Tom? Isn't the issue that in in the capacity of the TSB at the time, which is no longer the TSB, it's something else, another entity.
No, it's the TSB. It used to
TSB,
be the CASB.
CSAB, whatever. The RCMP was working as an investigator for them, and therefore were not allowed to investigate criminality. Is that how it worked, or what? How did that work?
I'm a police officer, or I was a police officer. In this country, a member of the RCMP is sworn to uphold the law. Part of that is when you have reasonable grounds to believe that a crime has occurred, you have to investigate it. Doesn't matter what your superiors say. I did not need a superior, the commissioner, or anybody else to tell me to conduct an investigation. For him to tell me not to is interfering in an investigation. And my immediate officer, an inspector, was passing on from the commissioner that there will be no criminal investigation here. We don't have the money, was what I was told.
Wow.
Who
And
was the
yet
This
I
commissioner?
is
had
bizarre, isn't it?
I had a phone call. When I came back from the first test, I had a phone call from the criminal operations officer, a superintendent, and he said to me over the phone, Tom, you have to keep tabs on what's happening. You have to be aware of all of the testing and be prepared for a, a criminal a criminal device. In other words, conduct an investigation. Later on, a year later, again, you're here as a policeman, and anything that you find, you report up the chain of command, which was to this inspector. But that same officer, a superintendent, a week later was a deputy commissioner in Regina. But the day that his last day in Halifax, he's in the hangar, and he says, even if we found an incendiary device at this late a date, we wouldn't be able to identify who put it on the plane, so there's no sense investigating it. Now, that's from a policeman.
Well, that also raises another issue. What happened to the FBI in this investigation? Because they were involved early or for a bit, weren't they? And then they just disappeared.
I worked with two FBI agents for a day or two in the all they did was they worked their fingerprint bureau. They were specialized fingerprint guys. And they left after 3 or 4 days, and I never saw them again. Apparently, there were some FBI agents in the aircraft hangar, but they basically had been told there's nothing criminal here, go home. It's a Canadian thing. If we need you, we'll contact you. The RCMP apparently was told very early in the TSB's investigation that if there's anything criminal, it'll be the FBI who carry it out, because the plane originated out of JFK and there were in excess of 100 Americans on board. So they would be the lead agency. They basically was told there's nothing here. It's an accident. And here we go with the IFIN system that you mentioned. The IFIN is the cause of the crash. It was a short circuit caused by the IFIN system, which it wasn't, but that's what caused it. So go on, stay on that side of the border, and we'll deal with the accident side and let you know.
See,
Basically, that's what occurred. And I went through meeting after meeting after meeting where I was severely reprimanded for conducting my investigation. Um, I I was actually given a piece of paper signed by my officer, my inspector, that said that I will change my notes. I will alter my notes to take out my opinion that this was a set fire. I have been qualified in 3 provinces and a territory in fire investigations in court and given expert evidence in court. I have been accepted as an expert in court for fire cause determination. I spent years on this file on Swiss Air with investigating and examining that material, spoke with PhDs who have spent years working with it. And yet, my inspector, who couldn't investigate a motor vehicle accident, let alone a fire, tells me that I have to take the stuff out of my notes. They said it was improper and against the RCMP Act for me to put my opinion in my notes. And yet, as an IDENT member, I did it daily on other files when I examined a fingerprint and it didn't belong to the accused. I put that in that's my opinion.
Tom, you would put I see
Well,
police
was
officers
that
putting
wrong?
opinions in notes all the time. That's where
Sure
you
they do.
put your opinion. You put it in your notes.
That's what notes are for.
Yeah, like that's it'll help maybe clarify something if you're looking at it later. Okay, well, I thought the car was going fast. Well, that's your opinion. You don't have a you don't have a speedometer or a speed recorder, but
I would go to a homicide scene and there's blood spatter on the wall. Well, wait a minute. What's your expertise to say that that's blood? Oh, hey, I've been accepted in court. That's blood on the wall.
yeah,
And that
it's
would be in my notes.
well, it's
So
not
yeah,
yeah.
it was a ridiculous thing. I was told by one of the guys had worked up, one of the ident guys had worked up through the ranks and become a superintendent. I had we had been friends for 25 years. He sat across from me and he said, in this meeting, when I was told to change my notes, he sat across from me and said that he was ashamed of me, that I had let him down, I had let the force down, and that I had no business doing what I had done.
But Tom, wouldn't that tell you that uh all right, so that's
Yeah,
really
what do you get, man? That there's something amiss?
well, it seems like a top-down directive, and it might just from what you said earlier about the FBI. Okay, so you think the FBI is going to be most interested, even more interested than the RCMP in the situation, and in particular in profiling the people who were on the plane, figuring out all of those things, and directing as much as they could, even taking over the investigation of the TSB or the RCMP and, taking control of it. But maybe they were taking control of it from afar by shutting down the RCMP. Like, here, this is an international thing here. RCMP, it's very important that you shut this down. And this, for,
Somebody told them to shut it down, and you're on the track.
yeah,
Somebody told them to shut it down.
because otherwise, I mean, why would somebody be ashamed of you for investigating? That doesn't make any sense. They would only be ashamed of you, quote unquote, if you weren't supporting the RCMP's top-down directives.
One other member, Carl, he was a plainclothes investigator out of what I called the back office. There were 3 or 4 guys back there who, for a while, worked different things. He he went to New York with 3 or 4 other members, and they had a meeting down there with the Port Authority police, FBI agents, BATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And I guess that was it. They were initially supposed to come to Halifax, but this inspector hit the roof and said, "No way are they coming. We're going down there. They will not come to Halifax. We're going down there." Carl had set up the meeting to meet with the FBI working the Flight 800 investigation. Instead, it was with the FBI working the towers, the first tower bombing. Remember, the names
1993,
escapes me.
1993, 94 in the garage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And they met with them. When Carl came back, he was absolutely furious. And he came to me and he said, "Tom, you'll never believe it." He said, "They came to the conclusion that dust balls and metal filings were sufficient fire load to create the burn damage that we saw." And I went to the guy who, the corporal who was with him and who wrote the report. And I said, "Brian, do you know anything about fires?" And he said, "No, I don't have a clue." I said, "Have you ever struck a match?" "No, why would I? I don't smoke. I don't." He grew up in an environment where it's all electric. So I said, "Brian, do you sleep with a fire extinguisher?" And "Why?" I said, "Well, there's probably dust balls under your bed. You want to be careful because they may set your house on fire." I was irate with him, and Carl was beside me, and you guys, I just couldn't get over metal filings and dust balls brought down that plane. Are you nuts?
Okay,
Anyways, that went into a report and went up the chain of command.
okay, two things. One, the you mentioned TWA 800 and Egypt Air 990. Both of them had a similar sort of history. Right as soon as the crashes happened, TWA 800, they said it was struck by lightning. Although there were witnesses all around Long Island Sound, and I've talked to many of those witnesses who said it appeared that a missile hit the plane.
There was a
Uh,
destroyer in the waters below it.
Yeah, and these were credible. Some were police, some were ex Air Force. I talked to a pilot who were right around Long Island Sound and saw it. Egypt Air 990. They said it was the co-pilot crashed the plane. There's some evidence he just bought tires for a truck to bring back to his son and stuff, and it didn't seem like he had a reason to do that. Um, Swiss Air, it was the entertainment system. That story comes out. They all stick. That becomes the narrative. Let me pass by that, and then you can comment on that. But the other comment is getting back to what you were just talking about. Tell a, tell the audience about how you took a ride on a DC-11 and or you were sitting in one and you noticed that the hatch and how somebody may have planted a device in the plane.
Yeah, my last, well, it was the second trip, I guess it was, to Zurich. I was part of what I was doing on the aircraft was taking panorama photos um, in the overhead area, and I had to set up my equipment, and I was on a stand up through a hatch. When the plane is parked at the airport and here at the hangar where they were working on it, the front forward right door, or the forward right door, was open. It is at the hangar are at the airport so that service staff can come in. And it was just inside is a hatch over into the attic area, the ceiling area. And I had been up through there doing my thing with the camera, doing a 360 in various locations and at various heights. And I had a Swiss Air, SR Techniques is the service group that look after the plane, and SR Techniques guy as my shadow to make sure that I could get into the aircraft where I wanted without damaging anything or disrupting anything. Well, he had gone for a coffee, so when I finished, I tore down my equipment and went over and sat down in a first class seat and closed the hatch, and everything was back to normal. Well, all of a sudden, I'm sitting there doing up my notes, and all of a sudden, he comes on the aircraft and looks around, doesn't see me, and okay, he grabs the stool, reaches up, opens the hatch, pulls himself up in, looks around. Okay, everything's fine, closes the hatch, and goes back out. And I'm thinking to myself, if I was in JFK Airport, that door is open. Somebody could have come into the aircraft, that unknown service guy. I already knew that there was an unknown service guy in JFK. He could have been wearing a Delta Airlines, because they do the servicing, Delta Airlines, coveralls, Delta Airlines coveralls. And with his little old toolbox, he could have reached up in there, spread his mixture of aluminum, magnesium, and iron, and put a timing device and initiator up there within 30 seconds. That's all it would take. And back out and gone, or back doing whatever he wanted to do. And yeah, that makes sense. And when I told my bosses back in Halifax, they just laughed at me. You're foolish. And I'm thinking, look, we have at that time, I knew that there was a guy that we didn't know who he was, had been on that plane. And the timing was, I didn't know about the AES results. As soon as we got the AES results, when Dr. Brown told me that first time, everything clicked. Well, there it is. There's the opportunity for an individual to leave the material and the time and device. That's there.
So, Tom, right, so Tom, think of this now. It seems like there's a US, obviously US control or angle to this. Who would want who would want to cover that up and not want it investigated? It seemed like the
Well,
US officials didn't even want to show that they were interested in the crash, to even draw that much attention to it.
let's back up a little bit and let me just explain what the RCMP did for me or to me over my notes. Um, I was I went through that meeting where I was told that my former boss or my boss was ashamed of me, and then changed the notes. The document changed the notes. I was in line for a promotion, and the assessment, nope, he's not promotable, and I lost the promotion. I went through a grievance process, and I tied with the guy who won and should have won the promotion, but no, he's got longer time as a sergeant, so he gets the promotion to staff sergeant. Okay, fine. I went through a process where I sent my material to an assistant commissioner by the name of Conlon in Ottawa, And after 2 years, they came back and said, my bosses had been within their rights to tell me to take that stuff out of my notes, that it's in the RCMP manual, that it was improper to put opinion material in your notes. And they had the term in there that your notes are supposed to corroborate the evidence to assist in a conviction. And I went back to them and I said, well, what about notes that go against corroborating the conviction and are in favor of the accused? What about those notes? Are they improper? Because if that's the case, then I've been doing it for years and I've been breaking your rules. Well, within 6 months, they changed I got notice that they had changed the manual and completely eliminated that corroboration stuff. But the key was they came back that it was proper for them to do what they did to tell me to change my notes. I had an opportunity when I retired to go to the police college in Ontario to instruct until they contacted one of my bosses, and he told them, no, don't hire him. They did not want me instructing because one of the subjects obviously would have been major disasters, and Swiss Air would have been a key topic.
Tom,
they wanted me to be quiet.
oh, for sure, that's the way they work, and character assassination.
And there was lots of that.
Before we move to the last part here, like who might have done this and all of that, there's one key piece of evidence, whoops, sorry, that stands out in the official narrative that we need to address. That in the final report, they said the insulation in the plane caught fire. And they
Oh,
did
yeah.
a little graphic test, a video. Actually, I think it was done around 9/11, the day of 9/11. And just to set this up for the audience, that people said the official reports said, and David Suzuki reported this, and Stephen Kimber in his little book, and the Fifth Estate in their piece, I believe, reported it too, that the insulation caught fire, and that was the fuel for the fire to get that high temperature. But you did an investigation on this, both on the plane measuring the water in the attic of the plane, the accumulated water, and you went to the tests and how they did the tests, which I think are very important, Adam, for people to hear.
Yeah. I went to three different tests down in the FAA in Atlantic City, New Jersey. The TSB guys purposely wanted me to attend. TSB and RCMP management didn't want me to attend, but the guys said, if I don't attend, then they cancel the test because they're not going. I think they wanted me to see this. The two guys that I worked with closely. When we did a series of tests down there of burning all of the different aircraft materials from our MD-11, nothing was found to burn exceptionally hot or beyond what was reasonably expected. Materials did burn, but they burnt slowly. We set up a mock aircraft attic area using a hull of an old aircraft, and we put the ducts in and put in the insulation blankets to match what was in the aircraft. And we set it alight. The first time they set it alight, they had used the wrong insulation. The new didn't burn at all. They had to light it 6 or 8 times, and it kept going out. So, okay, the next trip, we changed out and put the our MD-11's air insulation material in, and they Don Ends, the TSB guy, lit the stuff from underneath, and the material on the ducts, the air tubes, they're wrapped in insulation material. That outer layer burnt, but it burnt slowly, and it didn't burn hot enough to catch the same material that was in the overhead as insulating the skin of the material. All it did was burn along like an ordinary newspaper, a sheet of newspaper, slowly creep along, and that was it. There was you couldn't have roasted a marshmallow on it. So, okay, we come home, and that's the results from the second test. There's a third test, and I'm not going to go. And again, the TSB guys that I worked with said, fine, cancel the test. Well, geez, we need that test. Well, then we need Juby. Okay. So I ended up going with them, and they set up this hull again, and they used just metallized mylar. The insulation material in the aircraft is an envelope of metallized mylar that surrounds fiberglass insulation. Fiberglass doesn't burn, it melts. In fact, it's a fire insulator because it doesn't burn, it melts. But the metallized mylar does burn if the flame is sufficient. So anyways, we're going to the Dr. Lyon that I mentioned before, in charge of the burn unit, said, in that area of your aircraft, there's 1,000 grams, 2.2 pounds of mylar in that area. He guessed at it, but he said 2.2 pounds, 1,000 grams. That's the amount of flammable material that's up there. So, okay, we're going to put 1,000 grams in. Well, after a few minutes, I look at the TSB guys and I said, wait a minute, the stuff in the airplane is flat and layer upon layer. You're crumpling it up like you would crumple up a newspaper to start a fire. A newspaper, as it comes off out of the store, if you light it, it's not going to burn very fast. But if you take each page and crumple them up and light them, it's going to go shh. Well, that's what happened here. They crumpled up not only 1,000 grams, 5.8 kilograms, or almost six times. So 12 pounds of material.
Well, isn't the confounding thing, Tom, the other thing that you haven't talked about, flying back, measuring the water in the attic of the plane and the condition of the insulation on the flight from JFK to Halifax?
Well, the humidity in the plane, when you're on the plane, you're breathing out not only air, but you're breathing out moisture. That's why you get so thirsty at the end of a long trip. You're breathing out that moisture. That all goes into the air and up into the attic area, and against that cold material, it condenses. So you end up with water droplets on everything. It was so bad that Swiss Air put in a dehumidifier in the top of their aircraft because they were carrying 500 kilograms of water in the plane at the end of a long trip. 500 kilos, that's 500 liters. That's almost 100 Canadian gallons, 100 and some odd US gallons of water sitting in that plane. That's on all that material that's overhead. And the argument was, well, a spark would ignite that material. Well, it was damp. Have you ever tried to light satellite wet newspaper? It doesn't work.
How damp was it?
Well, it's a plastic material, but you spread 500 liters.
Well, as I recall from the documents, I think one of the tests was that flying from JFK to Halifax, the accumulation at that point, oddly enough, ironically enough, was 111 liters. Is that right?
Oh, I don't. I was never involved in that test.
I remember that document saying there's about 111 liters of accumulation of water in the insulation by that point.
Well, you take your garden hose and try to spread 100 liters of water. How long that takes you? How much water that really is, and how wet you can get your grass with 100 liters of water. That that's a lot of water.
Mhm.
Be hard to start a fire even with some dust balls.
Yeah, especially with dust balls and metal filings.
Yeah.
So I guess the point
So
is, well, go ahead.
so anyways, we we had I call it that final burn. I call it the fraud burn. John Garstang was there, and I don't think he was supposed to give me the weights, but he did. He made sure that I got them, and I do know that he was on the phone all the time to his boss back in the hangar, Vic Gurdon, and I'm quite sure that the instructions from Vic was that you create a fire that melts aluminum. And it did. It melted with 6 times the amount of material. It created results that I saw on our aircraft reconstruction, that amount of molten material.
Okay, now you've jogged my memory on one other thing before we move forward on the who done it. Speak briefly about the attempts to move the reassembled airplane from the hangar at Shearwater to Ottawa, which seems like crazy just to get away from you, it seems.
Yeah, there was well, there were a couple of things. Um, in on May 25, 2000, it was 2 years, almost coming up 2 years. And there was a TSB meeting that I attended where the guys were told, we're shutting down the 1st of September. What do you mean you're shutting down? We're just getting started. Well, the Bouchard was the minister or the ex-minister who was the chairman of the TSB. He wanted them to shut down the investigation. Well, why? Well, government interest. They're losing interest in it, and it's costing too much. We've spent $54 million on 2 Canadians. We're not going to spend any more. Well, what about the other people that were on board? There were 227 other people on board. Weren't they worth anything? So the guys, the TSB floor workers, uh, I saw almost a mutiny because they're saying this file is going to take at least 4 years. It was, there was so many bits. It wasn't going in and here's a huge piece of fuselage that you can look at with everything intact. They were putting it back together. They were rebuilding it piece by piece by piece. Well, eventually they came back and said, okay, we're going to continue on. Well, within 6 months, I think it was about 6 months, we're going to move everything to Ottawa. Well, why? Well, we need it in Ottawa. We're not going to pay this expense of having you guys down here in Halifax. Well, what about the expense of moving 250 tons of material to Ottawa? How are you going to move this frame that is what, 12 feet wide? You can't put it in a truck. Well, we'll cut it in half. We can't do that. So, yeah, we're going to move everything. And it was, well, where are we going to go? Well, we've got a hangar at the airport in Ottawa. Yeah, well, is it heated? No. Well, it's the middle of winter. It's 30 below in Ottawa. How are we going to work in those conditions? Well, you'll just have to do. Well, again, the guys on the floor, uh, you guys are crazy. You're sitting in your warm office and you don't know what you're talking about. And eventually they they changed their mind and they left it, and it remained in Halifax. But it is strange because that meeting where I was told to change my notes, I was going to be pulled from the file, and Ottawa Ident was going to do the work for the TSB. Well, Lee, the stuff is all down here. Well, what do you mean? It's been moved to Ottawa. No, it hasn't. It's still sitting down here. That was a year ago that they decided not to move it. You've been out of touch that much? And he had to kind of back up and say, well, okay, fine. So we had a case of the hierarchy absolutely not knowing what was going on down on the floor. They didn't understand the physical evidence, certainly not the RCMP. They had no idea what it was.
Well, was it that they didn't have an interest in what it was, Tom, and they just said, well, whatever the investigation is, uh, if it comes back with anything other than this was an accidental fire, then we'll deal with that. But otherwise, let them do their stuff and don't bother us until they
It
come back.
will come back as an
It
accidental
will,
fire.
yes. Yeah.
It's not if, it will.
Yeah.
And
that's all they wanted
that
to
was
know.
made plain to me. That was made plain to me. Now, I want to just kind of sidestep here. I want to tell you about a guy who worked for MI6. That's the British spy agency. He hired in 92, spent 4 years as a British spy in European countries. And in 96, he was booted out. Wasn't told why, and he was just given the boot. And he fought back, saying, I want to know why, and I want a tribunal. And they absolutely refused secrecy. So he ended up realizing that he had to leave Great Britain because he was being hounded and harassed by MI6. They were following, they tapped his email, they knew what he was doing before he knew what he was doing. And he ended up going to France, down to Spain, and he ended up caught a flight to Australia. And he decided he was going to write a book about MI6 and his exploits. So he went to a publisher in Sydney, Australia, and she wanted a brief of what he was going to write about. So he produced 5 pages, 5 typewritten pages, and gave it to her and said, lock it away, never to be seen the light of day, please, because this is secret. He gets back on the plane because he needs work. He's got a job in Great Britain. He goes back and he makes the mistake of contacting MI6 and saying, look, I want to write a book. How do I vet the book through you so that I can publish it? And they find out where he is. Uh, he's got emails going to the publisher. So they end up finding out who the publisher is. They do a search on her, find the 5 pages, come back and arrest him and charge him under the Official Secrets Act of Great Britain. When they arrest him, they search and whatnot and the whole bit. He ends up going into jail, into top security as a terrorist. He pleads guilty to the charge under the Official Secrets Act because he thinks he's going to get a deal on his sentencing. Instead, they sentence him to a year. This is in 97. In first part of April, I think it is, he's out on probation. And his probation term is no emails, no internet, no journalists. And he decides because his probation is up at the 31st of May, 30th of June, what are they going to do at the 31st of July, his probation is up. What are they going to do on the 1st of August? And he eventually writes a book, and I have his quote that something sinister is going to happen. They're going to do something to either frame me or keep me quiet.
Well, just to interrupt you there, the person we're talking about is Richard Tomlinson. And
Yes.
Tomlinson was involved. He was the one who revealed that MI6 was monitoring Princess Diana and her boyfriend Dodi
He
Al Fayed and all of that.
he gave evidence. He gave evidence before a magistrate in France that MI6 had a plan to take down a president who drove through a tunnel by using a paparazzi and a brilliant electronic flash to blind the driver. He gave that evidence to the magistrate, and a few days later, the Today Show in New York City requested his personal attendance to talk about it on their program. He flew over on Swissair from Geneva on the 30th of August, 98. He's met by immigration and naturalization, arrested in handcuffs, marched off the plane, detained, and told that the CIA has told them that he's a terrorist and he has to return to Geneva. He's persona non grata. Get out of the US. They put him on a flight and he's gone. His scheduled flight was our Swissair 111, MD-11, flight 111. He had been scheduled to be on that plane. Now, when you look at what the British did to him, what MI6 did to him, how they hounded and followed and went after him, and then what he said in court about what he thought they had done with Lady Diana and his fear of death, when he learned of our plane going down, he immediately went into hiding. It makes you wonder, just when you look back at 98 and communications the way it was, minimal email, cell phone, that type of thing, when a contract is, and keep in mind that MI6 are masters at deception, at false identification, and they do have license to kill. It makes you wonder if he was not, if his demise would not have cleared up a problem for MI6, for the British government, and for the Crown of Great Britain.
So there you are, Adam. You don't see that in Nova Scotia court every day.
No, that's getting up there in terms of
Now, now,
level, you know?
okay, when you stop and look at what the RCMP, how they handled this investigation, no profiling, right from the get-go. This is an accident. It is not to be a criminal investigation. And how they dealt with me, because I conducted a criminal investigation, and what they did to discredit me and have me try to have me change my notes. I never did, but I'm sure that if you went back into the file, the RCMP's file, you would find a version of altered notes. And Carl had been told to change his notes. You would find a version of his notes that were altered. I'm sure of it.
What does that tell you, Adam?
Well, it's it's interesting, right? I mentioned in the last show the Goldfinger strategy of and you know when we think of MI6, we think of the Bond movies and you know some of the other spy novels and movies and
What do you think
sometimes
taught the CIA?
sometimes they're the good guys, sometimes they're not, and they work together sometimes and sometimes they don't with the CIA and CSIS.
See,
Uh,
MI6 does not work in the US. They have an agreement with the CIA. They don't they don't work in each other's country. And of course, in this country, we have CSIS.
yeah.
We're a part of the British Commonwealth, so they're very interchanged, eh?
But what about the part,
But
Tom, where the guy doesn't actually get on the plane?
he doesn't get on the plane. But yeah, there's 2 days there. But stop and think. I'm I'm the guy over in Great Britain, and I'm ticked at this Tomlinson guy.
Yeah.
And by God, we're going to fix it.
Yeah.
We're going to take him down. And here's the opportunity: let a contract.
Yeah.
And they have a source, and they supply the fake ID, the whole bit. Here it is. Take down that plane.
That part doesn't even seem that hard.
It wasn't.
You know, if you know the
It
plane,
wasn't at that time.
you know.
Do you
Uh,
know what the American authorities said about the guy who was unknown, who worked the plane?
What?
Oh, we don't worry about that. We have that happen all the time.
So
right.
there's a vulnerability then. They should worry about that.
Well, my comment back to the member, the RC, to Brian, when they told me that, I said, okay, that's fine. How many of those planes crash an hour later are in the bottom of the Atlantic?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe try to worry about this one.
This one was.
Well, you had getting back to that, you had three at that point over the years: TWA 800, Egypt Air 990, and Swiss Air 111. I mean, an alternate theory to Tomlinson is that Al Qaeda or some group was practicing. I mean, over the years, they bombed the World Trade Center in '93, nothing happened. Egypt Air, TWA 800 went down, they said it was an accident. Was it? Witnesses said other things happened. Egypt Air 990 went down about an hour after leaving New York. They said it was an accident. Swiss Air went
990 went
down.
down after 990 went down after Swiss Air
No.
because I
Egypt
was in
Air
Ottawa.
990?
I was in Ottawa for
Yeah.
one
Okay.
of the AES tests when I heard.
Yeah, and so they're going down. These planes are going down. And was Al Qaeda practicing? Were Islamic terrorists practicing? The government kept saying they were accident, accident, accident. Same sort of profile for all the accidents. And did they finally say, well, okay, we'll prove to you this isn't an accident. We'll bring down the World Trade Center which sort of follows logically from those crashes. Is that a plausible theory, or is that just sort of stitching things together?
I really thought it was Al Qaeda. And Carl, when 9/11 occurred, I was in Atlantic City at one of the FAA tests, the first one, I guess it was. And one of the guy doing the operator doing the testing had his radio on, and he came into the room where I was preparing the material to go into the his test unit, and he said the plane's just hit one of the towers. I said, "Oh, geez, I said, well, how big?" "Oh, I don't know. We don't know anything about it." I said, "Ah, it must be some idiot in a small plane, didn't know what he was doing." When he came in the second time, second plane's hit, I said, "It's Al Qaeda. We're all at war. It's Osama bin Laden." And there were two or three Americans there in the room with me, and they looked at me, and I realized I know who Osama bin Laden is because of Swiss Air 111, but these guys don't. And they're looking at, I'm in the US. I'm looking at these guys, and they're looking at me as though, how come you know this? So I kept my mouth shut from then on. But yeah, we knew about Osama bin Laden in the hangar before he became public. But the problem with Al Qaeda is that when they took bin Laden down, they seized all his computers, and nothing has ever turned up about Swiss Air, which may or may not be of importance. But I really have to look at the sophistication of this. This isn't a boat ramming into the side of a destroyer. What happened with
Cove.
the destroyer over in the Middle East, and it's not a truck bomb parked in the bottom of the tower. It's quite a sophisticated setup, and false ID, the whole bit. So yeah, my money is on MI6, but that doesn't mean that I don't have any proof.
Well, but you do have a book, Tom, on the subject that people can go to. I mean, we've done two shows on this, and I think we could do two more because it's there seems to be an endless. Just the theories behind it are so fascinating. We're coming up close to the end of our hour here. I'd I guess encourage people to go look for the book Twice as Far. Uh, it's available on Amazon, all online retailers, I'm sure. I guess before we go, Tom, is there anything else you'd like to leave us with? Anything that you think we haven't covered that we can that's important for context here?
There's a lot. There's a lot in the book.
Yeah.
Um, uh, like I say, Tomlinson wrote his book, The Big Breach, and it's quite an interesting read. And when you get through what's interesting in his book is when it comes to the Swiss Air crash, it's 5 lines, 5 lines in a 300-page book. And yet he went into hiding because he thought MI6 was after him. He thought there was a contract on his life. And when I looked up Richard Tomlinson, when I was in the hangar, I working Swiss Air, I looked up Richard Tomlinson, and there's quite a write-up on Wikipedia that is no longer on Wikipedia. Wikipedia has been cleansed.
And we talked about that on our show last week.
Full circle.
Well, the last point on this, just for the history of Tom's book. Back after I wrote Dispersing the Fog in 2008, I met Tom. I got interested in this story. I tried to do a book, and I was written off as conspiracy theory. We got the Fifth Estate involved, and they sort of botched the story in the typical CBC way of giving everyone a fair share and being sort of professionally skeptical. And you watched the show, you had no idea what it was about because they sort of treated, well, Tom says this, but other people say this, and sort of neutralized the story, so there's no clarity to it. Um, Stephen Kimber's book was basically a press release by the government where he just took what the government said and never challenged anything.
The
And
media was controlled.
David Suzuki's nature of things was like, look at what these great scientists did, but never looked at the sort of the other evidence that was available, and sort of refuted what they said. So Tom was left at the end of the day to write his own book and self-publish it. And I congratulate him for doing that, and I congratulate him for his persistence and
Yeah.
sticking to his story.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, it takes some
Thanks.
courage. It would have taken courage to be in those meetings, Tom, I'm sure, and with guys that you worked with for a long time and pushing back against them. So yeah, kudos to you for all of that.
Well, I swore an oath when I joined the force, and I swore an oath to maintain the right to maintain the laws of this country. And those guys broke laws of this country. And there was, there's guys there that should be in jail. They were obstructing justice, and yeah, there's a whole litany. I went to a Crown Counsel, and he just shook his head and he said, "This is absolutely amazing. Those guys deserve to be charged." But he said, "In this province, it'll never happen because the Attorney General was a retired member of the RCMP. We must look after our own."
Yeah.
There you go.
And and my
There's your
last point
22
on this,
murders.
over my shoulder there, I wrote a book, Anatomy of a Cover-Up, and how I understood this cover-up was going to happen was understanding Swiss Air, the Meherrar case, and a couple of other things like that, because that educated me into seeing how Canada really works. That's it for me.
Yeah.
Oh, you
My
guys,
my boss in Swiss Air was instrumental in not Meherrar, in a coin. Mr. Acoin that did
Okun.
17 years for
Okun.
murder that he didn't commit.
Yeah. We
well,
can go
you
on
guys,
and we probably will. So
yeah. Okay. Well, you guys, thank you very
Thanks,
much for the
guys.
work you do. And Tom, thanks for joining us again. This is wonderful. I'm sure the audience is appreciating that. And we'll get you back to talk about something else. We'll find something else for you to talk about.
well, and that's Glenassoon, not a coin. Glenassoon
Not as
case.
soon. Yeah, I thought that might
Glad
be.
soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you
Uh,
very much.
Well, sorry, I used the wrong name. Sorry.
no, that's
It
fine.
happened.
All right. So thanks again,
My,
Tom. Good to see you again, Paul. And we'll see everybody again out there soon enough. All right.
okay.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.